What is religion, and who gets to define what is religion and what is not? Also, how do we decide who is considered a religious person and who is not? After all, in modern scholarship there are hundreds of different definitions of religion, but whose definition is ultimately right or superior? Imagine that we have a fish net, and if you want to get all the fish in the pond, you need to choose a really tight-knit net, so that not a single fish gets out of it. But in this case, you're also getting a lot of stuff in there that isn't fish, including garbage and other small inhabitants of the pond. On the other hand, you can get a net with wider holes, but in this case, a lot is going to slip through because your holes are too big. And now, if we apply this metaphor to religion, then it will help us understand how hard it could be to come up with a very exact definition of religion. Because there is always going to be religions that don't fit the chosen criteria. In contrast, if the definition is too broad, it becomes almost useless, because if everything is religion, then nothing is religion. For example, should the veneration of Elvis or Beyoncé be considered a religion? What about football? Or what about an attempt to identify culture with religion? Do you find it flawless? Some scholars suggest that often religion and culture are so tightly interwoven and inextricably intertwined that social scientists should conceptualize and study them together. But if so, how should we explain apostasy when, while living in a certain culture, someone declares that they lost faith and now all religious dogmas and rituals don't have any meaning to them? They claim to be non-religious materialists. On one hand, they are still residents of their city in India or Thailand or Egypt, and they are part of the culture of their country, but they claim, I'm no longer religious, and I see all religious practices as irrational. So what should we think of such people? It's also important to remember that things change over time. There was a time when Shinto was not considered a religion in Japan. Until now, many practitioners of Confucianism don't consider it a religion, while many Western scholars think of it as a religion. So who is right? And here we also approach another interesting dimension, which has to do with the relationship between religion and power. For example, which discipline must have a mandate or superiority to determine the best definition of religion? After all, the phenomenon of religion is studied by different disciplines. There are religious scholars, there are sociologists, anthropologists, psychologists, theologians, economists, evolutionary biologists, neuroscientists. All of them could study religion, but which discipline has a priority over the others? The very phenomenon of religion is so complex, and different disciplines are focusing on studying its different aspects. So how can anyone say that the approach of this or that discipline is wrong? For some, what matters more is what people do when they practice a religion, while for others, what people believe in, or how the human brain or body reacts to a certain ritual, and so on. In other words, there are so many ways we can study it. So what is religion, and who has the right to decide such a question? If you think about it, it's not only about the researchers of religion. Various governments and often the tax services have to come up with criteria by which they determine who has the right to receive religious status in their country and who is not, who has the right to be registered as a religious entity, and who gets tax exemption status and other privileges. Just try to compare how French, Indonesian, or Chinese governments approach it, and you'll see how different it could be. Some would point that in the US, these criteria aren't ideal, and in many ways they reflect the Christian understanding of what religion should look like. Sometimes it comes to the point that religions that don't fit the IRS criteria have to adopt certain Christian attributes in order to receive tax exemption. The documents are filled with words like church, Sunday school, scriptural studies, ordained ministers. But not every religion has all this stuff. And here we see a hint at another issue related to power. It lies in the fact that the very discipline of the study of religion was invented by Western scholars, usually Christians and most often Protestants, or Western unbelieving researchers who studied it from a socio-evolutionary perspective. Many scholars see power as central to understanding the study of religion, frequently pointing to the legacy of colonialism. According to Nicolette Weber from Boston University, the very concept of religion was constructed through colonial relationships between European countries and the rest of the world. We have to be very, very careful when inheriting these categories. And since such categories and methods have been developed through the lens of Western Protestantism, sometimes it gets hard to apply them in non-Christian cultures. If we study the genealogy of the very concept of world religions, we'll see that for a long time the privilege was given to so-called main world religions, such as Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, but the religions of local indigenous peoples were often ignored. There was even a time when Buddhism was not considered a religion. Therefore, those who have the power often determine how we study this phenomenon and how we determine what is religion and what is not. But voices of which scholars should have a priority, those from the global north or the global south, believing or non-believing scholars, male, female, or non-binary scholars, Muslims or Buddhists. It often will depend on the geography and political structure in the region. Also, often sociologists of religion conducting international surveys compile questionnaires that reflect a very Protestant idea of what religion is. For instance, how close do you feel to God? But not in all religions proximity to the gods play a significant role, or the very concept of God isn't relevant there. Therefore, the field of study of religion must rely on diversity when it comes to race, class, gender, ethnicity, religious background, and other factors. It's important for us to hear different voices, because for a very long time this area was dominated by a rather narrow group of people, and those new minority voices that appear on the academic horizon today are forced to interact with the prejudices and stereotypes of that narrow group. There is an interesting book by anthropologist and historian of religion Daniel Dubuisson, where he argues that the very concept of religion is a Western construct. It was invented in the 19th century by scholars who created it as a field of scientific study. He also claims that the difference between secular and religious, as understood in the West, is meaningless in many non-Western cultures. But even if it is so, we still need terminology that will help us explain the phenomenon of abandoning one's ethnic, cultural, or religious heritage. For example, imagine a person grew up in an Orthodox Jewish family in Brooklyn, or in Punjab in a Sikh family, or in Mongolia in a family that practices shamanism, or in a Zulu family in South Africa, and they watch videos on YouTube and declare to their relatives and friends that they no longer believe in the existence of a spiritual reality, whether it be gods, spirits, or ancestors. That is, they became materialists. Therefore, reading various scriptures or participating in some rituals no longer makes sense to them. Can we then say that they have become secular or non-religious? If not, why not? And what word do you think is more appropriate then? Other scholars also notice this. Although at first many theorists and researchers of religion were unbelievers, then sociologists and psychologists switched from the study of religion to other areas of knowledge, and religion was studied in many ways by believing Protestants. But today, often in response to the politicization of religion, secular and religious researchers sometimes compete for voices in the academic community. For example, some scholars indicate a clear division during Sociology of Religion conferences into two camps. One group of researchers are non-believers who want to reduce the influence of religion in society, and the other is practicing believers who try to point out the positive impact of religion on society, and there isn't a lot of crossover. It turns out that to this day, researchers of religion don't have a generally accepted definition of what religion is. But is it so bad not to have a definition that everyone would agree on? Well, not really. Do economists have a single definition of what is economy, or do historians have a single definition of what is history, or what about anthropologists and the concept of culture? It turns out that each researcher has the right to choose or create their own working definition of religion, and starting from it, explore the phenomenon. From my point of view, since I'm specializing on the phenomenon of apostasy, I would emphasize that the study of apostasy can play a key role in the study of religion and religiosity. By conducting qualitative research with those who have given up religious belief and practice, scholars should be able to identify what exactly they have rejected, and what exactly allows them to say that they are no longer religious. My friends, I hope this video was helpful, and please let me know whether I missed anything, or share what you think about this subject, and check out my other videos. I wish you peace and health wherever you are.